Hello, everyone. We're going to just wait a couple minutes. We just got a big rush of people coming in to join, so we'll give them another minute. Okay. Hello and welcome to our next presentation today. This is Holly Bice from Bice Policy Group. If you were in my presentation, that was the last hour, I talked about how blessed I have been to have some people seemingly fall from the sky into my life and as I've been advocating, and Holly is one of those people, I have to say. Um, I love this woman dearly. She has been a tremendous help to me. She has been a great person to help educate us. She walked around in Washington, D.C. with us when we went the last time to meet with Hovind's office and the Park Service. And she just has a wealth of information. She is a great resource. And that's what we're trying to do here. So Holly's knowledge goes so far beyond anything that I could say. I'll let you talk about whatever it is you want to talk about on your history and your past and what you've done. But she's done a lot. So without further ado, Miss Holly, I'll give you the floor.
All right. Okay, I'll share the screen here. Uh, does that seem like it's all up there, Chris? All right.
Yes, it's good.
Fantastic. All right. Well, hey everyone. So I'm Holly Bice, and as Chris mentioned, I'm based here in Washington, D.C. And what I do is I work with nonprofits and companies to help them develop winning advocacy, lobbying, and political strategies at the federal, state, and local levels. I've been doing this for over a decade now, and much of my experience has been around equines, animal welfare, agriculture, and natural resources. And I'm very glad to give this talk today because people often express frustration and ask why more progress isn't being made on this issue. And certainly there are inherent challenges in the political process, but also in my experience, this issue could benefit from more collaboration and also political engagement at the campaign level. So today we'll go over some strategies that you can use to enhance your advocacy for wild horses and burros. And really you can apply many of these strategies to really any issue. Also, throughout this talk, I'll address some of the common challenges and how to get through those. And at the end of the talk today, you should hopefully be better equipped to advocate and also hopefully feel more comfortable engaging with your legislators. All right. So let's start at the top. Much of the conversation today is about the federal government. And why is that? That's because we're talking about animals that are protected and managed under federal law on federal lands that are managed by a federal agency. And the US Congress has the only true oversight of those agencies. If you want to make positive changes, it will generally need to be done through the US Congress, which creates the federal laws, and through working with the federal agencies, such as the Bureau of Land Management, that implement the laws and manage the horses and burros. I believe there certainly is a role for the states to collaborate with the federal government, and I've actually worked on passing legislation to do just that. But most of what we'll talk about today is very federally focused. I often get a question from people about whether their voice really matters, or are they just wasting their time when they engage with their legislators? And I can assure you it does matter. When you engage with a legislator, it shows them that there are people who care about this issue. It brings it to their attention. Keep in mind that Congress is dealing with many issues of national concern. Numerous other organizations and companies are contacting them on many other issues every single day. The legislative process in and of itself is also inherently challenging, no doubt, and it can be difficult to get attention on any one particular issue. So hearing from you is absolutely important to break through the noise. All right, so let's jump into some advocacy. If I can get to the next slide. There we go. As a first step, you've got to identify who your legislators even are, right? So everyone has 3 federal legislators in total. You have 1 US representative and you have 2 US senators. If you want to find out who your representative is, you go to www.house.gov and you type in your zip code. And I included a screenshot just to give everyone a visual about what this looks like. So when you go to that website, you'll see it up in that upper right-hand corner. Just type in your zip code. And then here I used the 90210, which, come to find out, that zip code spans across a few different congressional districts. And so when that's the case, the system has you put in your more complete address information, and then it'll narrow it down so that you get your 1 US representative who represents you. And then very similar, go to the Senate website that I provided there, senate.gov, and you'll be able to see who your state senators are. Every state has 2 senators, and both of those senators represent you. So in total, you have 3. And then once you identify them, I always say it's important to do your research. So go to their websites. Each legislator has a website where you can learn more about them and where they stand on the issues. Their websites can be very useful. A lot of people don't know they exist, but they're very useful. Hey, even as a lobbyist, I use their websites. It's very informational. You can see their press releases. What press releases are they putting out? What bills are they introducing? What are they? Some of them will put information on their website about who, what bills they're co-sponsoring. You should also check out their social media, and their websites will often link to their social media profiles. So that's just another little trick. And then once you've identified your legislators, and learned a little bit more about them, you can start to advocate. So I always like to start with the phone call, right? That is still, it's a classic strategy, and it still makes an impact to make that call. This is especially useful if there's an issue coming up for a vote, and you want to encourage your legislator to vote a certain way, or if you want them to co-sponsor a specific bill. You can find their phone number on their website. So again, very useful to go to their website. Or you can call the Capitol switchboard to get connected to your legislator. Once you're connected, give them your name, let them know that you're a constituent, give them your zip code or your city, and then give them a short message. And I always say keep it short, especially since it's a phone call. Writing to your legislators is still very important and very effective. These days, it's all online. That's the best way. If you try to do snail mail, it could take a very long time to get through. There are various security protocols that could result in quite a delay. So typically, Congress says, hey, if you want to write to us, it's easier to use our website. So when you go to your legislator's website, they'll have a contact form. You can use that form to make sure that they get your message, and it provides a written record. They do keep track of these. They will see it. I get that question all the time. Do they actually see it? Do they pay attention to it? They do keep track. And what I recommend is that you make your subject line very clear with your ask. If you're asking for them to co-sponsor a specific bill, for example, clearly state that you'd like them to co-sponsor and then include the bill number. As an additional side note, you can find bill numbers, text, and other information on a website called congress.gov. Also very handy to have in your advocate toolkit. Right now, as a side note, right now it is still early in the new Congress, and most bills haven't been reintroduced yet. but I expect that many equine bills will be reintroduced throughout the year. And when you're sending these messages, it similar to a phone call, I say, always be polite, always be concise. You can say a little bit more because it's written, not just on the phone. But just keep in mind that in order to make an effective written communication to your legislator, they have a lot going on. So this is definitely not the time to write a book. Keep it short and make sure you rely on facts and get your information correct before you hit send on that message. And then I included a little screenshot here just again to give a little visual. In this case, it is Representative Schweikert's website. If anyone is not aware, Representative Schweikert is a fantastic advocate on wild horse and burro issues. He's been a great champion, so I wanted to use him as one of the examples on this website. And so if you are lucky enough to be one of his constituents, you can go to his website, and then you'll see up along that top bar, it says contact. You click on contact, and that's going to take you to this page that you're seeing right here where it says email. And then in this screenshot, I couldn't include the entire form in there, but you'll type in your information. They want your address because they want to make sure you're a constituent, and then you put in your message there. All right, here's a big one. So meeting with your legislators. One of the most impactful things that you can do is schedule a meeting with your legislator or their staff. If you haven't done it before, I highly encourage you to do it. If you have done it before, I encourage you to do it again. It's about building a relationship. So if you're wondering where to start with this, or even if you've done meetings before, some people don't know that they have offices in DC, but then they also have offices back in the state. So for representatives, they'll have offices located within the district. Senators, they'll have offices located throughout the state. Again, if you go on their individual websites, they provide that office information so you can see which office is closest to you. And I always tell people, don't overlook the local offices because they are there specifically to serve constituents. There is a huge benefit to building a relationship with the local office. Sometimes you can't get through to the DC office, or maybe the DC staff aren't being very responsive to you. That makes your local office key. And it's impactful when you go to the local office and then the local office reaches out to the DC office on your behalf. Now, that does help get their attention. In terms of the format for the meetings these days, understandably, some people may live in areas where they can't get to the office in person, or they might have very tight work schedules. So fortunately, many offices still do meetings virtually. That became common after the pandemic. And it's really increased accessibility overall. If you have a virtual meeting, I would just say, make sure you prepare. Don't wait until the last minute. There are always technical issues. Prepare in advance the day before. Make sure you can log into Zoom or Teams, whatever platform they're using. Make sure you can actually log in. Make sure your camera and your microphone are connected and work. And then in terms of what to expect, you typically get about 15 to 30 minutes for your meeting. That's another reason why you don't want to waste time with technical issues. You want to be able to get your message through. And so in that amount of time, you've got to build credibility and professionalism. You have to make a connection. You have to educate and persuade, show them that you have solutions to propose and show that they work. And then also establish that you're a reliable resource and make them an ally. And, I always say this just to remind everyone, it's also very important to do your research in advance of the meeting, get your talking points lined up, and provide facts and solutions, because the time is you're going to feel like the whole meeting went by in 2 minutes. So you want to make sure you really have your thoughts organized about what you want to say. And then as part of doing your research, I'd also look into the legislator as well. So look at their record. So have they co-sponsored any equine bills? What is their position on other animal welfare issues generally? Maybe they've co-sponsored another piece of animal protection legislation. And then that's also helpful because when you're in the meeting, you can start by thanking them for something. For example, if they did co-sponsor another animal protection bill, you can start the meeting on a good note by thanking them for co-sponsoring that other bill. In terms of other things that I would talk about in your meeting, I would also recommend talking about why this issue is important to you. Share a story or a personal experience. Legislators also want to know how the issues impact the local district. Give some examples if you can. Also, have an ask. The ask is the reason you requested a meeting. And you want to have an ask because it makes your meeting most productive. But also sometimes the staffer will straight up say, hey, what's your ask? So the ask is, what would you like your legislator to do after your meeting? Are you asking them to co-sponsor a bill? Are you asking them to vote a certain way? Are you asking them to do something else related to wild horses and burros? If you're with a horse rescue, you might want to consider inviting your legislator to visit the rescue. That's a great way to, it's a great ask, and it's also a great way to keep building that relationship and really bring the legislator into the community for that hands-on experience. And it really makes for a great photo op for the legislator too. I also say when you go to a meeting with a legislator or their staff, always be polite and remember you're working on building a relationship. Ideally, you're going to meet with them more than once. And I always say to remember, people don't always remember exactly what you said, but they always remember how you made them feel. And then finally, I wanted to mention follow-up. Follow-up is a piece that often gets forgotten. I like to flag that one. Just send a brief thank you message to the staffer and say, hey, thank you so much for meeting with me about wild horses and burros. If there's any follow-up, for example, if they had a question during the meeting that you wanted to double check and make sure you get your information correct, you can follow up, provide the answer to that question, provide that information. If you're horse rescue scheduling a visit, you can include that in your follow-up information. All right, so far we've talked about calls, letters, and meetings. I want to cover social media, letters to the editor, and op-eds because they're a great way to raise awareness among the public generally, and also gain the attention of policymakers. Another tried and true. Social media, the legislators are all on social media. You can follow them, you can also engage with them. Staffers will see your messages. So keep them short and polite. Staffers are constantly bombarded by negativity on social media, which is recent surveys are showing that congressional staffers are starting to not really like social media so much because there's just so much negativity on there. However, it's still a just necessary part. So if you do have a polite message, it'll help you stand out and go a long way. And I also personally just see far too many rude, negative messages. And when people post that type of content, it's really just hurting the horses and the burros. In terms of other social media strategies, some organizations can use social media campaigns to help raise awareness and push for a certain goal. So they can do online ads through Instagram, Facebook, X, etc. Okay, letters to the editor and op-eds. So these are pieces that you write and then you submit online for publication. Letters to the editor, also known as LTEs, they're shorter, usually about 200 words or so. Op-eds are longer. They can often be about 500 to 700 words. These are effective because they're published online so everyone can see them. Each paper has different rules regarding the length and submission instructions. So you want to look up your local papers and then, go to the paper's website and then go to the opinion section. And then you'll find those instructions on how to submit a letter or how to submit an op-ed. And just make sure that you follow the instructions in terms of, the word count and anything else that they need. And then for both of those, my general advice is keep those short, use facts, create sound arguments. And what's the ask? Include that in there. Perhaps you're asking them to co-sponsor a bill. State that. Grassroots and grass tops. Many of these strategies that we've talked about so far are great for grassroots advocacy. Grassroots is about volume, getting a lot of people to speak up through calls, emails, and social media. There's strength in numbers. Think of, reaching out to your friends, your family, and other advocates to encourage them to take action. That's grassroots. And it's a critical component on this issue and really any successful advocacy campaign. But many people are unfamiliar with the term grass tops. So grass tops is often used to describe someone who has special influence on a legislator. Think of more high profile people. This could be a celebrity or it could be someone with social clout. It's important to keep an eye out for these and engage if you can and utilize their influence to build support. Coalition building and collaboration. This is a big one. And some people won't like what I'm going to say, and that's fine. But one thing that we desperately need more of in the wild horse and burro issue is more collaboration. That's one of the reasons why I like that this virtual summit is happening. This is a great collaborative opportunity. I think pretty much everyone here knows that there is too much infighting among wild horse advocates. That's been going on for quite some time. And truthfully, as someone who has lobbied this issue on Capitol Hill, I can tell you it's one of the absolute top problems holding back progress on this issue. A united front is absolutely needed. There are too many advocates going in different directions, and the policymakers and the federal agencies, they see it. And the result is that it makes them less likely to act. And I would just strongly encourage everyone to start looking for common ground with each other and coming together on policy. Even if you don't want to be best friends, maybe you're not going to all go hang out with each other. But to the degree that you can, come together and find that common ground. Don't post negative things about each other online. Just don't do it. Staffers see it and they're aware of it, and it hurts the horses. And it gives this very negative impression to the wild horse issue generally on Capitol Hill. And it's never a good look. And the opposition sees it too, and it makes us look weaker. So it's important to really pull together. There's strength in numbers. But on top of collaborating with each other, this issue also requires collaboration with other stakeholders and the federal agency in order to make progress. Again, I've lobbied on this issue, and I can tell you Congress wants collaboration. And also in general, Congress prefers collaboration on many issues. But on this specifically, the lack of collaboration is posing problems in Congress. It's causing problems on the legislative front. And Congress has really urged for stakeholders to try to come together on this issue. Certainly, we know that the treatment of wild horses and burros has been going on for quite some time. But Congress recognizes that there are other stakeholders, and we can't expect that they're just going to be ignored. Congress is not going to ignore them. And that includes whether it's the Bureau of Land Management and the ranchers too. And I do think it's going to be difficult to make progress on this issue unless we start having conversations with the agency, with the ranchers, and find areas where there can be some common ground and propose specific solutions. Sometimes when people of opposing viewpoints get in a room together, they find that they have more in common than they originally thought. And I know it's going to be tough. I'm just going to put it out there. I know it's going to be tough, and but it is something that has got to be done. All right. Lastly, I wanted to talk about getting political. This is something else that the movement really needs. When I'm talking about getting political, I'm talking about going beyond lobbying and getting involved at the campaign level. Your legislators are always running for office. As soon as they get elected, they immediately start fundraising again for their reelection. Fundraising, without a doubt, it's a key component of political campaigns. And candidates, so members of Congress running for office again, for example, they spend a significant amount of time talking to donors, mobilizing grassroots donations, because they need all of that to keep their reelection campaign going. Now, many interest groups know this. They're completely aware of this. So they utilize this as a way to build influence and gain access to legislators by making contributions to the legislators' campaigns. But here's the thing. Wild horse advocates have the ability to do this too. For example, you can host a fundraiser for your legislator. How do you go about doing that? Well, first, you can get in touch with your legislator's campaign and ask to speak with their staff who handle fundraising or their finance director. That's a great place to start. And think about other wild horse advocates that you could invite to attend this fundraiser and make a contribution. Political action committees are also another tactic that are commonly used, and we could use more of this in the wild horse and burro space. So political action committees, also known as PACs, they're organizations that amplify the voices of specific groups in the political process. They essentially garner influence by raising money and then spending that money to support candidates and influence elections. Certainly, this should not be started on a whim. This should be part of a thought out strategy because PACs are held accountable to the rules of the FEC. And so you'll certainly want to consult with professionals to ensure compliance. And I will also note that bipartisanship goes a long way. Whether you're getting political and getting involved in campaigns or you are lobbying on this issue, reach out to Republicans and Democrats. Certainly don't assume that this is just a Democrat issue. You need to reach out to Republicans as well. So we went through how you can advocate in a meaningful way and some of the key elements that are needed in the wild horse issue, collaboration and political engagement. I hope that this was insightful, and I think we can go ahead and open it up for some questions, Chris, if this is a good time for that.
Yes, thank you, Holly. That was great. There are a lot of questions. So first, someone's asking, I understand the SAFE Act is being introduced again in the new Congress. What are your thoughts about strategies and its chances?
Yeah, I think a lot of yes, I would expect SAFE Act to be reintroduced. It's been reintroduced many times over the years. You know, in terms of its chances, the Congress has become very dysfunctional. So to give you some perspective, they only pass roughly about 1% of bills that are introduced in the Congress. I think that something that we're going to need on the SAFE Act is a little bit of what I talked about today. I mean, and certainly we need to keep up the grassroots advocacy on this. Your voice does matter. And I know I hear a lot from people that get very burnt out from contacting Congress about this. But I would say stay at it. This is not something that's going to happen overnight. and really reevaluate, you know, you've called and you've written. Have you done meetings? Have you done meetings with your legislator? If you have, keep doing meetings with your legislator. Stay in front of them. And you have three, and it can keep you pretty busy, but they're highly effective. LTEs and op-eds. You got to keep those going on this issue. Keep it in the public dialogue. You know, when you're writing LTEs and op-eds, you can mention your legislator's name in there, and then they will see it. Uh, and you can ask them, you know, co-sponsor the SAFE Act or push for the SAFE Act to get a vote. That's ultimately what it needs. However, the other issue with the SAFE Act is that it does face very fierce opposition in the Congress. There are major, powerful stakeholder groups that block it from moving. So it's not getting that legislative movement that it otherwise could. And so at some point, some conversations may need to be had in terms of, you know, figuring out how to address some of those challenges and how to address some of the concerns that they are stating to Congress about why they're afraid for the SAFE Act to pass, and then taking proactive action to address those, to show Congress, no, these are not concerns. No, no. Any bill, so in terms of chances, any bill, it's going to be tough. But you never know when your bill is going to get its chance. You never know.
Linda's asking, and this is part of collaborating that we're doing here. She is holding a in-person conference, like in two parts, and one of the things they're going to do is have a wild horse lobby week, and they're planning on doing it the last week of March. Do you have any thoughts on this as far as timing?
Yes, that should be good. I don't have the congressional calendar in front of me right now, but I would just say, Linda, make sure that you check the House calendar. So the House and the Senate each have a different calendar. So you'll need to find the House one and then the Senate one. I believe they are in session that week. You want to make sure that they're in session when you do your lobby week. Um, I have encountered advocates in the past that came to DC when their legislators were not in session. So just make sure that they're going to be here. That would be the most advice that I could absolutely give on that. And then also make sure you have the advocates who join the lobby day, make sure that they're prepared for the lobby day in advance. So typically what I do when I'm preparing a lobby day for someone, I put together like a 1-pager, 2-pager with talking points, and I distribute that to them ahead of time so they can have time to review those, you know, learn the issue a little bit, kind of practice a little bit. I would also make sure that you have a clear ask. So what is your specific ask? And sometimes it's easy to have a very long list of asks. To the degree that you can prioritize it to a couple, that would benefit you and make it more successful. I would not give them a list of, you know, 6 different asks. Limit it to 2 or 3 if you can. And then I would also make sure that you schedule the meetings in advance. Reach out to, you know, you'll have your list of congressional offices that you plan to meet with, and then reach out to each of you'll want the animal welfare staffer and schedule a meeting so you have a scheduled time to meet with those offices. I will say that typically legislators only want to meet with their constituents. That being said, if you're affiliated with an organization, national organization, they'll typically still meet with you and you'll still be influential. But if there are people who are joining who are not part of an organization and they're going as individuals, I would focus the most on trying to get those meetings set up with their 3 federal legislators. I hope that helps.
I have a couple questions to kind of piggyback off of that. One is, and this kind of came up in another conversation, but when you're talking about, our asks, and I know from working with you and you've seen it, um, what our legislation even going into the session looked like and what the end result was, there has to be compromise, right? And that's something that we're trying to get across too. I think that too many advocates want to go in and say, hey, look, Congressman, I don't want helicopters used. I don't want birth control used. I don't want cattle leases. I don't want this. I don't want that. Pass the SAFE Act, do this, do that. Is it better if we just went in and said, hey, stop the helicopters, right? What is our biggest issue, right? Stop the helicopters, stop using Gonacon, whatever your issue is, know that you're not getting everything, and we can't expect that. That's where there has to be compromise.
Yeah, I would recommend, narrowing it down for sure. I think when you go in with this very, very long list, it's tough to get Congress to move on all of those at the same time. It does make it very challenging, and you know, it's it's better to get, a little bit and then keep advocating and keep getting more and more than to just say, oh, well, I want everything or nothing.
Right.
Because I think the horses would prefer to get something rather than nothing, with
Exactly.
the idea that you're continuing to advocate. I'm glad you brought that up, Chris. That's so true.
And then can I ask you this? Because you said, like, when they're doing the lobby week to make sure that Congress is in session, there have been times that I find that there's a big difference when Congress is in session and when they're not. Is it beneficial? And we talked about during our presentation, most of the time you're going to meet with a staffer anyway. Have you noticed, is it different to meet with that staffer when Congress is in session versus like when the boss is at home? You know what I'm saying?
Good question. So for me, as someone who's based in DC, I still meet with staff during recess when they're not in session, and I do find that they tend to give me more time. They're more relaxed. It's less stressful because the boss is not around. They're not watching floor votes. It's not so crazy. That being said, just make sure you would just want to make sure that the staffer is going to be there, because some staffers either work remotely or they go out of town or they go back to the district during recess. So, I know I've known people where that happened to them when they came out for a lobby day and it was during recess time. But that being said, you can do it during recess time. You just check to make sure that the staffers are definitely going to be there.
When you were talking about, checking out the legislators and seeing if they have co-sponsored any horse legislation, what if you find, Terry wants to know, what if you find that your legislator hasn't co-sponsored any or hasn't signed on to any?
Then you say challenge accepted. You get them to co-sponsor a horse bill. And if you're, I think I used that as an example of, hopefully something that you could thank them for, just to kick off your meeting. And maybe you can't. If you can find something else, that would be fantastic. If you can't, just start the meeting with some nice rapport anyway. But you know what? Even I sometimes get questions about, well, I have a legislator who's just really bad on animal issues. It's a waste of time to go see him. It is never a waste of time. It is not a waste of time. I want that to be known. Keep at it, because even if they're very hostile on animal issues, hearing from constituents can at least neutralize them so that they don't take harmful actions against horses. Even if they're not going to come around and co-sponsor or give exactly what you're asking for, it will still be helpful, because who knows, that could be a legislator that down the line you're trying to move the SAFE Act, and well, he's hostile on horse issues, and so he goes and files an amendment to strip out, SAFE Act on the floor, um, or to block it. And then, in that case, gosh, wish we would have had some constituents go and visit him and talk about why this was so important, so that he wouldn't do that.
Right.
Yeah.
Heather wants to know, we talked about this a little bit. When you're talking to your legislator, whether it's in person or over the phone, should you raise more than one issue? Like, should you talk about the SAFE Act and other wild horse legislation at the same time? Or, like, is it more impactful to pick one? Does it cause confusion to talk about multiple different pieces of legislation?
You can do that as long as you just make it clear that you're talking about two different pieces of legislation. Uh, and typically at the very end of the meeting, what I will do is recap recap it so it's very clear that there are two different pieces of legislation and two different asks. I personally say, maybe don't go beyond three. If you go beyond three, it starts getting a little more confusing, and it just starts to seem like a very it's overwhelming for them, I found. And
Okay.
that's really just, there's not a science to it. That's really just from doing literally hundreds upon hundreds and hundreds of these meetings.
I think you touched on this too, but Cheryl wants to know if you have any recommendations on how to advocate when you know your legislators do not vote in favor of wild horses and burros, when their record shows they seem to always vote in favor of ranchers. How can you overcome this positively? And how often is it appropriate to contact their aides? I want to ask you a question, because this is something Heather and I talk about a lot too. We talk a lot about the ranching community, and it's not fair what the ranchers are doing and things like that. I think, and I think you're a good person to ask, our fight is not with the ranchers, correct? It's with the laws and the policies that are there. Um, I've said to Heather, if wild horse advocates got everything that they wanted and they were like, no more cattle on public lands, the ranchers would not just go, oh, all right? They would fight whatever they could on the policy. So I think one of the things is we have to stop fighting the ranchers, correct?
I would agree with that. Yes. Yes. And that's going to bring you, I mean, and that really hasn't been done yet, right? But there has been a lot of fighting the ranchers, and that hasn't worked. It hasn't worked. And the direct feedback that I have gotten from Congress, again, from doing so many meetings on the wild horse issue, is that they want to see some collaboration. And I do think that when you start having these conversations, and if you can get them in person, if you can meet with some ranchers in person, and they can meet with you in person, because they have, and we have bad perceptions of them, they have bad perceptions of us too. And so trying to make it a little more human in person is very impactful. And trying to just, you know, yeah, I think getting these conversations going, and it might take a little bit of time. Uh, but I can just say that what we've been doing is not working. And so we've got to try something different. And this is this is the number one thing that I hear from Capitol Hill on this, is that everybody's just fighting. They're fighting with the advocates, and then fighting between the stakeholders, the ranchers and the wild horse people, and everybody calls the other side crazy. And it's just not productive, and it's not getting anywhere. And then meanwhile, horses are getting round up. So we got to look at this a little bit differently and be willing to do something a little bit differently, even if that means putting aside some of that bad blood and those bad feelings for the sake of trying to find some type of common ground so that there could be something to move on. And there's not going to be agreement on everything, but there could be some aspect that there's agreement on that we could move forward with.
Heather wants to know, if you haven't already, can you tell us how important it is to tag legislators on wild horse posts that are factual? Aides do watch for those tags, correct?
Yeah, so yes, so generally when you're interacting on social media, uh, yes, tag your legislator, and yes, they do have staff or aides. They have staff that will see if you tag a legislator, they see it. If the legislator's name is mentioned, whether it's your traditional media or social media, they all have media monitoring, so they see it for sure. And yes, you can tag them in posts. I think though what would be most impactful is creating a fresh post. If you have factual information, if you see a factual post and it inspires you, maybe instead of just tagging a legislator on that post, which they'll see it, but I would, I'd be worried that they might be more dismissive if it just looks like, just this long chain. So you might even consider creating a new original message and tagging them.
So like sharing the post and, Senator Hoven, please check this out, something like that.
You could do that, or you could, if you could just like repaste the information
Okay.
just to make sure it's not, you know. On the other hand, depending on what the post is, and if it's a good quality post, and maybe it's had a lot of engagement on it, a lot of likes, and you want them to see it for that specific reason, then I can see why you would tag them there. There isn't really, a right or a wrong answer on this, I think. I don't think there's any data indicating which way is more effective than the other.
Stephanie wants to know if you can offer 2 to 3 areas of conflict you see among wild horse advocates other than birth control.
Oh, gosh, birth control is a big one. Um, well, another area where there was some conflict was, now I think there were several years back, there were some groups that were okay with some removals. And there was a disagreement about that. I think I feel like birth control is probably, I feel like the biggest one that I see that definitely gets mentioned on Capitol Hill all the time is over birth control, and whether to just leave the horses alone or whether to manage them. I would say that's the big one that gets pointed out.
Do you think it's useful to call and message the White House also?
It wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt.
Okay. Linda wants to know, what if we do what New York did and pass safe acts in our states?
And that's not a bad idea either. So, that'll require an entire legislative process by the state, right? And so, it depends on the state and the political landscape of that state. If it's going to be hostile to this or not. But typically, if you know your state legislature, you know who your more animal friendly legislators are, talk to them to get their assessment about whether this has a chance of passing. You might talk to other animal protection organizations that have a presence in the state, uh, particularly if they have a presence at the state capitol. And then
Okay.
you'd need to just go through, it'd have to be drafted and go through introduction and go through that entire legislative process to the governor, et cetera.
All right. Do you think the Farm Bill is the main avenue for the SAFE Act?
I think it's going to be very tough to get into the Farm Bill under the current political landscape. Yeah, especially under the current political landscape for the Farm Bill. The chair, so with the new year came a new Congress, and based on how the elections went, there are new chairs of the Agriculture Committee. So Agriculture Committee is the committee that has jurisdiction over the Farm Bill. And the House chairman and the Senate chairman are not open to the idea of the SAFE Act being included in the Farm Bill. However, one could always try for an amendment on the floor when the Farm Bill goes to the floor. That being said, this goes into the whole legislative process and all of these kind of nuances within how to get legislation passed. But there could be opportunities on the floor. I think you have several dozen new members of Congress right now, so they would need to be educated about this issue. And that's another thing that I should say for anyone listening. Check to see, another reason why you should check to see who your legislator is because you might have a new freshman member of Congress, right? And so they do really need to hear about this issue because they're new to the Congress and they've never heard about it before. So you need to educate all of those new members of Congress so that you could win a vote on the floor. But then also getting on the floor, and when I say the floor, that's when you're in front of the whole entire chamber. So for example, the House floor is in front of the entire House of Representatives. But in that case, in order to get an amendment on the floor, you have to go through something called the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee has to approve whether or not your piece of legislation even gets a vote on the floor. They're like the gatekeeper. And then oftentimes, the chairman of the committee with jurisdiction, in this case, agriculture, gets a lot of influence over what amendments are allowed to go to the floor. So I don't know that they would allow it, but if the votes are there, it'd be worth a try.
So we talked about this before and I don't want to forget, appropriation season is coming. So can you talk a little bit about how that can be used in advocacy?
Oh, appropriations. I call appropriations the fun that never ends. The appropriations process, so that is the yearly spending bill. And you might hear it in the media referred to as the budget or the budget bill, spending bills, appropriations. And it's a process that tends to drag out for the entire year. It always gets pushed. It always gets pushed further out past the deadlines that Congress is supposed to make. They never actually make the deadline, so then they extend it over and over again. Yes, so the beginning of the year, though, typically it all restarts. Even if the previous spending bills are not complete yet, when you get into January, February, March, it immediately just starts going right. Congress starts considering the next appropriations bills. There will be, as part of kicking off that process, each member of Congress takes what's called member requests. And so that's where they take requests from constituents, advocacy organizations, etc. And you can request language that you would like them to include among their list of priorities for the appropriations bills. And so typically that's available via an online form. I believe all of the congressional offices have moved over to this online system. It used to not be a nice, easy online system. We used to have to do these. You'd have to contact the staffer, get them to send you a document. They'd send you the document. You had to fill it out, and then you had to send it back to the staffer. Anyways, you can see why they ended up automating it by opening up like an online system. What you can do for your legislators, they'll typically have a link available up on their website. So again, go to your individual legislator's website. And then some of them have it as an individual tab. Some of them, it might be just you find it nested under another tab, and you'll see it maybe in like the drop down menu. And it might say appropriations, or it might say, spending bill. And then when it opens up, you can submit language to that.
So this isn't a place, though, I think, to be clear, this isn't where you would say we have to pass the SAFE Act, correct? This is a place where, like, Senator Hoeven, and there's a video that we'll keep sharing throughout the summit. He put language in the appropriations bill, and it ended up really being one of the things that saved the wild horses in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. And he said in this video, and he has talked to our office, they will continue to use the appropriations process to make sure the park is being compliant with the things that they've promised to his office. So this is a place where you can talk about birth control, not funding sterilization, different smaller points like that. Is that correct?
Right. So you want it to be items that are related to the appropriations process. So typically you'll be asking them to spend money on something, or you'll ask them to restrict funding on something. So in the case of sterilization, restricting funding for the use of sterilization. Typically, you're going to be more successful if you're restricting funding for something rather than requesting funding for something.
This piece of the legislation only ends up being about a couple lines long, maybe a small paragraph. So it's not a whole big thing, but it is another way that, well, even if your legislator is not on the appropriations committee, every member of Congress submits their request into appropriations every year, correct?
They
So,
so well, so you'll submit it, and then a lot of other people will be submitting requests as well. And so your legislator is going to get tons and tons of appropriations requests. They're going to go through that, and then they're going to narrow it down to what they decide to make their priorities. And then if you make that list, it gets sent off to the appropriations committee as a request from that legislator.
but I think the big theme between my presentation and yours is have a relationship with your legislators, follow up, keep communicating, those kind of things.
Exactly. That's how you get it done. I mean, it's not as easy as just, fill out a form and then it happens. There's a lot of lobbying that has to be done before and after, a lot of follow up. You just keep following through. Because nothing gets done. I always say nothing gets done in Congress unless somebody is really pushing it.
Okay, Mary wants to know if you have any advice for residents of the Midwest where there are no HMAs. She said it's challenging for constituents to show how improve the importance of welfare of Mustangs.
Hey, that's okay. There's a lot of East Coast people that don't have HMAs, and there are lots of members of Congress from the East Coast that support wild horse protection, even though they don't have HMAs. It's still a national issue that they should still care about. And in terms of, showing that it's important to you as a constituent, and it's just the simple fact that it's important to you as a constituent. Get a sense from other people in your community. Like, talk to other people in your community. How do they feel about this issue? Would they even want to join you in a meeting with your legislator? Maybe you have a horse rescue somewhere around inside your congressional district or in your state. Every state has horse rescues. Talk to the horse rescues. They may have had experience with rescuing wild horses, or had some experience with the wild horse issue, or dealt with some type of impact of the wild horse issue.
It can also be just keeping things like, please pass the SAFE Act, please vote in favor of that if it comes up, and just letting them know that that's where you stand on
Exactly.
it. Question, we're meeting with senators on California Montgomery Pass Wild Horse Roundup that's scheduled August 2025. And we're wondering if there is any way for federal funding they're talking about. We have involved tribes and senators, yet it's feeling like they just are doing this. What can we do?
So, okay, I see that question. So you're wondering about the federal funding being taken away for that?
Right, that'd be something that could be requested in the appropriations bill, correct?
Reducing fund, yes, that's something that could be done. But if you, and when you submit that request, the other thing is that for whatever you're submitting, if you're submitting a request on the wild horse issue, it's important to have solutions, right? And so if you're asking them to do something or you're telling them not to do something, we also have to remember that they're being told by the federal agency and other stakeholders that that the horses do have to be removed. So you want to be able to make your case that the horses don't need to be removed and that there are other more humane options that are available. That will help, because typically when you make these requests, they're going to ask for background and context. So that's what's going to make your ask much more successful.
This is something maybe we could do at another time. Nancy would love to see a role-playing scenario of a meeting with a legislator.
Yeah, that'd be neat.
That's something we
Chris,
can
that's
work on.
actually something that, oh, I know you said with the legislator, but Cynthia and I are gonna kind of do that together too. So if she wants to make sure to watch Cynthia Smoot's presentation, we're gonna do a back and forth kind of like that.
Maybe we can help the ranchers. Maybe we can get the ranchers to help push the SAFE Act. This is where I think what Holly's talking about too, with collaboration and just finding your common ground. And I know I went with Heather this fall to Salt Wells Creek. So we're talking about 1.3 million acres of public land where there are 400 horses and there are other livestock there too. We're not saying get the cattle off, right? There's more than enough room there for everybody. So do we have to fight the ranchers? And for all we know, are the ranchers really saying get rid of the horses? I don't know. You know what I mean? We're just hearing that. And I'm sorry, I don't believe that the BLM, the Park Service, or the Forest Service are always truthful. So I think, yes, working with ranchers, I can tell you too, and I know it's different here in North Dakota in this aspect because our horses are in a national park, so they're not fighting with grazing permits and things like that. But I've talked to a lot of ranchers in our state who love wild horses, and they know other ranchers in other states who love wild horses. So it's not a blanket ranchers hate horses kind of a thing. So I think that would be a great idea, talking to ranching organizations and seeing if you can get conversations there. Mining on public lands, could you speak to this challenge to the horses? Doug Bergham's top priority is energy.
Well, it depends on, I'm not watching that as closely, but is that going to be happening on HMAs? I mean, if it's happening on HMAs, that would be a challenge, right? I mean, one of the tricky things about the wild horse issue is that their, legal habitat is within those HMAs, right? And then the herd areas, which are, I guess, I think of it as like potential legal habitat. And that gets into the whole nother thing about how arbitrary those lines are for HMAs and NHAs. But, uh, if it's happening on those lands, then that would pose issues that we should look into.
Aren't those also land issues? And there are different organizations and entities that are fighting land issues. So maybe working with them to see where they are with that. But I don't feel like we have to take on every single issue as a wild horse advocate. We take on enough.
Yep, that is true. It could be a collaboration opportunity. There are a
Right.
lot of environmental organizations that are working on the mining issue. If there's something going on herd management areas, that could be a way for a wild horse organization or advocate to work with an environmental organization. Because environmentalists, they're another stakeholder group that often is considered to be at odds with wild horse organizations. But again, does it really have to be that way?
I think that Western Watersheds Project proves that to be false. They don't, for anyone who doesn't know, they don't have an official stance on wild horses, but they do see the benefits of horses, and they do advocate against livestock overgrazing on public land. So absolutely. And Eric Mulvar does have a presentation during the summit too. So he would be a good person if you haven't signed up to see. And he's also, he speaks really great. So what about reaching out to the Dodge DOGE to offer cost saving solutions?
That's worth a try as well. I like these, different ideas. That could be worth it. I'd just say, put together, make your case. Put together a fact sheet, put together the numbers, do an economic analysis, and show what your solution is, and then what the cost savings would be projected to be.
Is there anything we can do to influence what committee a bill is assigned to?
Yeah, not real. Well, yeah, no. It depends on how it's drafted, really. So it's more so up to the legislator who introduces the bill. Depending on how it's drafted, it could end up going to Agriculture Committee, or it could get triggered to go to Judiciary Committee. It depends on how it's written. And the SAFE Act is a great example. It's had different names over the years. It's had different text over the years, and that has changed repeatedly because it was a matter of targeting a particular committee.
Nancy wants to know, and you're the perfect person to talk about this. What have you heard about what they're doing with the new Colorado Horse Committee? I'm gonna say a couple things and then I'll let Holly talk, but Holly actually is one of the people that drafted the legislation forming that committee. She also has been working with us with the Theodore Roosevelt horses, and this is something that we're doing here in North Dakota. We have a bill 2331 that should be heard next week in front of the committee, asking for the state of North Dakota to put together a working group to work with the National Park Service to manage the horses. And one last thing I'm going to add is that before Governor Burgum was, and this is again the importance, I mean, I cannot stress enough the importance of having relationships with all of your legislators, state, federal, everything. Governor Burgum was still governor. He wasn't tapped yet for Secretary of the Interior, and I met with his office knowing that he was going out, but I had had such a great relationship with them. I said, hey, this is legislation that we're proposing. Holly, you were, I think, on that call. You were on the call and part of that meeting. This is legislation that we're proposing. What do you think? Would you have supported this if you stayed? Do you have tips and thoughts for us on how we move forward with this?
Yeah.
And at the time, they didn't know what happened in Colorado. And I don't know if we had a chance to talk about this, but they had no idea what had happened in Colorado and about the working group that happened. And so we told them about that and told them we're trying to replicate that here, brought them some information about the Colorado working group. And Governor Burgum then a few weeks later was appointed as Secretary of the Interior. And he had a meeting with a local news station here, like on his way out as governor. And they asked him, of course, about the horses, because that's a big issue here. And he said, you know what? We're looking at what's happening in Colorado. He goes, and here you have a Democrat saying, let us help manage our land. And he said, we're saying the same thing. He goes, and what they're doing with this group is an innovative approach that I like. We don't need more regulation. We need more innovation like this. And so hopefully now this ends up being something that he takes with him to work in a good way as Secretary of the Interior. Again, I did not know when I had that meeting, and I don't think you knew, Holly. We had no clue that he was going to be appointed Secretary of the Interior. What if we didn't have that conversation? His staff went back and talked to him. That also shows that too. But I'll let you go on about the Colorado Horse Committee.
Everything Chris just said about these relationships with all of your legislators, state, local, federal. You never know how things are going to turn out or where someone's going to end up. And it's so important to have those conversations. Yes, so as Chris said, I was very much involved with that. I worked for the American Wild Horse Campaign at the time. We recognized that we were doing some trailblazing there, that it was truly a new innovative approach. And what I really liked about that legislation and the new working group was that it really brought together different sides, the different stakeholders, just like we were talking about we were talking about collaboration and trying to have these conversations, and having sponsors of the legislation who, you got a Democrat and then you've got a Republican and in the big cowboy hat, and you brought together the agriculture community, ranchers, environmentalists, wild horse advocates, and brought them all together. And this is just such a great step to take on this issue to show that collaboration can happen. And I'm excited about the prospect of it in North Dakota. And it's a model that I'd like to see in other states. And I think it'll need to be a tailored approach. It might not be appropriate for every single state, right? Everything's not that easy. You can't just take a cookie cutter approach. You have to make adjustments based on the circumstances and political landscape. But it goes to show that this can happen. This kind of collaboration among stakeholders, it really can.
All right. Well, everybody's saying how much they really appreciated this. It was really fantastic. I knew it would be. Like I said, I love having the opportunity to talk to you, and I'm so glad that I could bring you here to talk to everybody. So thank you so much for your time, Holly.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you for having me. And it was so great to talk to everyone. And I hope that this was very helpful. And I see some of the kind comments. Thank you so much, everyone. Really, really appreciate it. And do feel free to contact me if you have any follow-up questions or anything you'd like to talk through. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Go get them.